I'm talking to Mr. Ayaz Sayed-Khaiyum. He's the Attorney General of Fiji, but also Minister of Communications there. Welcome, Mr. Sayed-Khaiyum. Now, you've got a problem in Fiji in that you've got a relatively small population, less than 1 million, spread over a large area, several islands. What are the problems that you're having in terms of the telecoms operators who want to come in and service those people?
Well, the points that I raised in the session earlier this morning was that a lot of these small island countries are in fact vulnerable. Vulnerable in the sense that because they're developing societies and because in fact they're opening up their market, so to speak, to liberalize the telecom sector, and because there is not enough national, I suppose, budget to be able to cater for the various technological advancements that need to be made, they are essentially reliant on private sector. And the private sector obviously is represented by some of them very large companies who have actually quite a lot of clout. They do have a very large, not just clout in terms of financially, but also in terms of their accessibility to the global market. So when they do come in, they can sometimes engage in anti-competitive behavior. And you know, this entails, for example, asking for exclusivities, for example, doing deals or entering into agreements if they are to provide a particular service. That is at times unconscionable. Now, I'm of course not saying that all private companies are such. There's obviously some very good companies who have good corporate responsibility type principles. But I think there's a certain level of vulnerability, in particular in the Pacific Islands, which is where I come from. You have nation states that have a population of 110,000, 150,000. And so the economies of scale don't really work. So if a company does come in, we see at times that their demands are perhaps a bit too much, which they probably would not ask in other developed economies.
Do you think that there's a size of country where it is no longer possible to have a competitive market?
Sometimes when we are negotiating, when governments are sort of forming contracts, etc., these Pacific Island countries, because of the lack of human resources, are perhaps not in a very advantageous position because the knowledge base is not there. I can tell you, without necessarily naming names, some e-governance type contracts we've seen, it is completely skewed. In favor, of course, of the provider of that service. And so the national government or the people who are there, they don't necessarily have the know-how, or they don't have the knowledge base to be able to negotiate on equal footing.
So what do you need? Lawyers? You need teams of lawyers, because large telecoms companies have teams of lawyers who can write up a contract that can leave you in a lot of difficulty.
I think lawyers, and also with, in fact, actual IT expertise, people with engineers, for example, programmers. So there is a whole range of services that's not available locally. So we need to source that from overseas, and that obviously means expenses also.
So what would you like to see at an international level? Would you like to see the ITU lending expertise either at a technical level or at a legal level, but also playing some sort of role as an international regulatory authority if there are bandit companies that are exploiting their market position, especially with vulnerable small island developing states like Fiji?
ITU, for example, in Fiji's case at the moment, is helping us with spectrum planning. There was actually no spectrum plan for Fiji. So we had companies, for example, that were issued frequencies and they've sort of hoarded frequencies, or they've kept frequencies which they are not using, or they have, for example, perhaps even subleased it themselves without the knowledge of the regulator. So ITU is helping us in that sense. They've also developed some software programs to be able to do the allocations. So that is one of the things that they have already done. But I think they also need to be able to be the bridge, I suppose, between the private sector and also the small, vulnerable island countries.
So you need a big brother to look after you?
I think so. Brother in partnership.
And is this just a thing that's happening in Fiji and the Pacific Islands, or have you found other small island developing states or smaller countries that haven't been able to stand up and punch their weight with the telecoms companies?
Well, you hear a lot of sort of anecdotal type stories, not just from the Pacific, but perhaps from the Caribbean, where big companies have come in and hauled the governments through the courts. And of course, in some instances, they may be rightfully so. But in terms of the resources at their disposal, I think is a lot more than perhaps some of the small island countries. I mean, at the end of the day, the GDP of some of the island countries are far less than perhaps the annual turnover of some of the bigger companies, internationally speaking. I think at the end of the day, island countries like in the Pacific, we are a lot more vulnerable to natural calamities. We do have the issue of global warming, and we do need technology. So it's really a situation where we need it.
You mentioned just now that you really need this service, and it's worthwhile underlining. I wonder whether you would do that for us, just how important ICTs are for you, because Fiji is a remote set of islands, and many islands by definition are very remote, and ICTs are essential, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And also you need to put into perspective. Fiji is considered to be the hub of the South Pacific. For example, all the UN regional bodies are headquartered in Fiji to service the other Pacific Island countries. We have a regional university, so all the other Pacific Island countries send their students there. So from that perspective, Fiji is seen as a big state. It's seen as a state with infrastructure. But we need to continuously improve on that. For example, things like e-health is very important for us, in particular providing services to the outer islands. I mentioned to you earlier on that we have 100% penetration as far as mobile phones are concerned. Now, that's well and good, but I know not everybody in Fiji has a mobile phone, nor are all the areas in Fiji covered by mobile network coverage. But the point is that, if I come into these international forums, I have 100% penetration in Fiji because there are now more mobile phones than actual people. It is in a way misrepresenting what's actually happening on the ground. And I tried to sort of bring that message to the fore today, that yes, there's all these advancements are made, we're getting higher speeds, we're getting more coverage, but please recognize the fact that there are some people who are still quite vulnerable, and in fact there's still quite a few people on the margins.